In the post-World War glow of the 1950s, California was a very different state.
There was a sense that California was the cutting edge of the American dream, and that what was going to be put together here was going to justify all the struggle of the Second World War. It was the brave new world of suburbia, of families, of swimming pools.
I love you, California. You're the state that welcomes all.
And there's a mood there that California had to educate the workforce for this wonderful future that awaited it.
In the 1950s, California schools were thought to be among the best in the nation. Back then, local communities controlled their schools and paid for them with local property taxes. New suburbs were springing up everywhere, and in some districts, the money poured in.
Public schools were being built by the hour and dedicated. Public school architecture was at its best. An entire generation of talented young men and women went into public school teaching and administration. There was a sense that a utopia was being formed in the classroom.
The extra charge estimated by the subcontractor is...
One of the main things I remember was we had free summer school. We had 6 weeks paid for by the school district where they had kids go every day to a program 9 to 12 in the morning that was like a fairly good summer camp that you'd pay money for.
My dad came out here after the war. He was attracted by many things in California, a business climate, a sense of hope, climate, but among those things was good schools.
The education of its young has always been a vital concern to its people.
California invested heavily in schools. 5.5 cents of every dollar went to education.
The school district had so much money that they didn't even use the state textbooks. They sat on the wall and they bought textbooks off the market that they thought were better and more appropriate and more interesting.
The state's commitment to education extended beyond public schools. In 1959, California created a comprehensive system of public colleges and universities, the first state to do so.
It was a commitment to anybody in the state that there would be a place for them somewhere in the higher education system. But there was a commitment of access to everybody.
This is a center of great educational institutions. Among them, the world's largest, the University of California, with an enrollment of 25,092 students.
This was, this is the land of sunshine. It's the land of new opportunity. It's a great kind of wonderful historical tradition in that. There's still something in our air, in our water, that makes people reach for those all-purpose, magical solutions.
And I know when I die, I shall breathe my last sigh for my sunny California.
California was awakened suddenly from its reverie in 1965. Riots broke out in the Watts section of Los Angeles. After 6 days of rioting, 34 people were dead, and entire neighborhoods lay in ruins. The Watts riot drew attention to racism and poverty and to the problems in California's public schools. California's system of paying for schools with local property taxes had created vast inequities in education, with some well-to-do districts outspending poor districts 4-to-1.
Public schools in the 1960s, looking around, began to pay attention to public education as the primary vehicle of equal access and upward mobility into the society. If you have a society that is struggling for equal rights for each of its citizens, then the public schools, if they were the cutting edge of the society, had to be the cutting edge of that reform.
In 1968, California's system of funding public schools was challenged in the courts in a lawsuit known as Serrano versus Priest.
The theory of those cases was Beverly Hills spends X amount of dollars for its students per pupil, and East LA students get X minus a couple thousand for their students, and that's not okay. So we should equalize funding, and that will fix education for everybody.
The court agreed and ordered equal school spending across the state. But that did not mean that poor districts got more.
What happened then is we equalized down. So we spent X minus a couple $1,000s for all students, including Beverly Hills students, which was a plus for no one.
We had all the districts spending in a very narrow range, $100 adjusted for costs. And so we really wrote off adequacy, and we ended up with equalized mediocrity.
California imposed a ceiling, limiting spending to a few $1,000s per student. Districts that had raised the most money in the past were hit hard.
And if their property tax revenue went up, then the state took away state funding. If their property taxes went down, the state backfilled. So if you got more property tax revenue in your school district, you just lost state money. The public was said, well, gee, our property taxes don't go to schools. It doesn't matter if we raise more money for schools and property taxes, it doesn't go to schools, so what do we care?
Meanwhile, property taxes exploded.
Relative property values in California were skyrocketing. It was a time of inflation. People would have a house that they bought for $30,000. It would get reassessed at $150,000. Their property tax would triple.
I am mad as hell. And the people are mad as hell, and I'm getting madder than hell every day.
Before long, California had a property tax revolt on its hands, led by businessman Howard Jarvis.
Howard Jarvis, he had been a kind of a bumbling sort of fellow, never been taken very seriously, a gadfly kind of guy. But he grabbed onto an issue that struck the hearts of people in California, that the property taxes were out of whack.
There is no limit today, none whatsoever, on the amount, on how much you and I may be taxed.
Jarvis and his supporters demanded a freeze on property taxes for homes and businesses and got it on the 1978 ballot. It was called Proposition 13.
Proposition 13 is designed to cut the taxes in California, and the way to cut the taxes is not to give them that much money in the first place.
I'm against the lottery.
Proposition 13 sought not just tax relief, but also protection against future taxes. If passed, it would require new local taxes to be approved by 2/3 of the voters.
Much of the state's political and business establishment has lined up against 13.
As Election Day neared, critics of Proposition 13 predicted a devastating effect on schools. Jarvis pushed ahead.
Thank you, youngster. Good. Very good. We're not going to hurt your schools.
Voters went to the polls on June 6, 1978.
Proposition 13 caused what may be a record voter turnout.
For 25 years, we've had increasing taxes on properties. Now it's a chance for the people to say something about it.
This excess in spending, I just feel it's just getting out of hand.
It's kind of like a Boston Tea Party that we were saying we've had it.
The polls closed at 8 p.m. Californians waited for the results.
The man of the hour, the man of the year in California, and the man of the century in this country, the greatest tax crusader in American history, Howard Jarvis.
To the dismay of California's political establishment, Proposition 13 won in a landslide.
I am forming the American Tax Reduction Movement for the United States.
Howard Jarvis became a folk hero because he won. I mean, think of it. He took on the establishment. All of us were against Prop 13. The governor was against Prop 13, bipartisan support. But it passed. So who was in contact with the people?
This executive order will freeze all job hirings and job replacements in the state of California.
California felt the effects of Proposition 13 immediately.
The first firings were announced in San Diego, an across-the-board reduction in all county departments. And what will happen in the schools?
Summer school went away for my second child because that was one of the first things to be cut. And the textbooks became older, and the special services for health became less.
It affected a whole lot of other things, arts programs, music programs, phys ed, language programs, counselors, nurses, librarians, libraries.
They cut the classroom periods from 7 periods to 6 periods, and then some school districts cut to 5 periods. So we actually cut the school day in high school dramatically.
People who came here all through the period of the 80s and into the 90s were shocked at how bad things were in a lot of the schools.
Vote for Proposition 13.
What began as a grassroots campaign in California became a national movement. Its founder, Howard Jarvis, died in 1986. His Proposition 13 is still in effect, along with a legacy of unintended consequences.